Hello and welcome to the chapter on host application and data security. So in today's lecture, we'll talk about how to secure a host computer, hardware and software wise, and we're going to define the application security and we'll explain how secure data should be used to using loss prevention. And so let's continue. Let's start. There are three important elements to secure a host or any computer on the network, and their applications and their data. Three elements that are very important to protect in an organization: the device, the computer, the application that's on it, and the data that's saved on it as well. So we're going to talk about all these three. So you got to think about how do we protect the computer physically, logging in, for example, the applications that are running on it, and any of the data that's being saved. All right, so the securing the host will involve securing the physical device, the operating system that's running on it, all the applications, and that's on there. We probably have to put some monitoring logs on there to find out, and that they can send us alert if there's any problems or any issues. So the first point that I want you to write is the three elements to secure is the host, the application, and the data. So because I want you to always think about that when you have a computer, there are three things you have to protect. It's not good enough just to have a username and a password and not protect everything else. Maybe you have to encrypt the data that's on there using BitLocker, and maybe some of the applications should not be accessed by everyone that has a username and a password. All right, excuse me. So to prevent unauthorized users from gaining the physical access to equipment, you have to make sure, for example, if you are in a lab environment, your computers should be bolted to the desk, the monitors, the mouse, the keyboard, and so on, and even the desktop itself. As you've probably seen in many of our classes, that's what we would usually do. Even with the laptop itself, should be somehow, if you need to leave it in an office, should be locked down as well. Um, but if we're talking about um, equipment, networking equipment such as switches, routers, servers, no one should have access to these physical devices. It should be in a network room. That network room should be locked with a key. Of course, it should have air conditioning, ventilations, and all of that, and some maybe video surveillance just in case a problem occurs, and they will send us alerts. The reason you want to do that because you can always access the switches, routers, and servers remotely from your office. Probably if anytime you need to really change cables or you need to have physical access, you can do it, but most of your work would be done remotely. So physical access is extremely important. That's probably number one in terms of securing your information security. And the reason is you can do any type of encryptions no matter what, no matter how well secured. You can have firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, detections, you name it, VPN setups. But if your physical devices are not secure, somebody can just walk in and break them down and steal them or throw them out the window. So physical security is extremely important. The hardware security and the mobile devices too. We got to talk about, your maybe mobile phones, your smartphones, your iPads or iTouches or whatever that your mobile devices or laptops and so on. We have to secure them as well. All right, when we're talking about hardware locks, there are two different types of when we're talking about hardware locks. If you're using regular keys, a problem with keys, they could be stolen, they could be duplicated. If someone leaves the office, you have to create new locks, and it could be a pain. It's probably a good idea to these types of locks that can be used. This is the deadbolt lock is much better than the residential key lock. but it's preferable that you use the cipher key, which we'll talk about in a few seconds. Um, Again, when we're talking about logs, if anybody changes office, you're immediately supposed to change the logs and change the keys, of course. Make sure no one just anybody that leaves has, you don't give them their payments for the monthly or weekly or whatever until they hand in their keys. Uh, but if you use a cipher key, it's much easier. You just reprogram it. Of course, you got to keep a record of who uses the keys, all the keys that have been issued and to who. The master key should never have any identifying marks, and only specific people will have those master keys that can open up everything, of course. Secure unused keys in a locked space if you have them. Typically, big companies will have their own key cutting machines that they will cut keys for every time they have a new um, office that they have to build in. Um, Again, and that's another good point. Don't mark, make sure you don't write "do not duplicate" on the keys because then they know it's most likely it's a it's a master key. The cipher lock is a little bit more sophisticated. I like those because I taught at one university at one time that they had these cipher locks, and every semester what they did is they would change the um, the pin on the key on the doorknob itself. So they'll send us an email what the cipher key is. Of course, we're not supposed to share it with any of the students. And when we come in, we just type in the key. We never need a key. And when the semester's over, they'll just issue a new key. Um, Here, you probably guys are familiar with this. They have these in restrooms that if in a building that's shared by multiple offices, for example, so you don't have to issue keys to everyone. It's much easier. An alternative access method, you can use a physical token, an ID patch, such as, with that you can scan with your photos on it. Those scanners will emit, of course, a radio signal, and the radio signals will either open up the door or ask for a PIN, maybe, in addition to having the patch itself. Or you can use the radio frequency ID tags. They could be on your window, on your car window, that will open up the gate, for example, without you have to scanning anything. You guys are probably familiar with a lot of this stuff, right? A man trap. This is where you, for example, let's say if the network room is back here, what you want to do is to restrict physical access to the network room. Like I said, no one should have access to it. Your office would be right in here. So if somebody comes in and somebody's tailgating you, they'll have no choice but to see you first before they have access to the lab, for example, or the network room. Something that is extremely important, you want to create a man trap. Uh, I got this on the Security Plus examination test, a question that says how do you prevent or mitigate against um, tailgating? And the answer is create a man trap. So if somebody was tailgating you trying to get into this door, they will not have access to the sensitive network room, for example. You should also definitely have an access list to record all the individuals who have permissions to enter the secure data when they come in, when they go out, right? All right, write down what man trap is. That's another point I want you to write it down. These 2 points on a man trap. We just discussed it. Video surveillance, right? You should have definitely video surveillance, maybe outside in the parking lot, just in case to see who's coming in, who's going out. Um, Also, maybe in the network room to see if there's any fire in the hallways, of course. Of course, you want to let the people know that they are on cameras. Nowadays, I heard, you know, a person might be videotaped 18 different cameras every day. So there's a lot of eyes watching you no matter where you go and what you do. Fencing you probably want to use too, depending on your company and where it's located, with barbed wires as well. Um, Physical security, protecting the host system. Portable devices also should be secured. Some of the laptops, but I gotta be honest with you, those laptops. I had a laptop about 10, 15 years ago that was cable locked just like this, and I was at a university many years ago, about 10, 15 years ago, and somebody just walked in, snapped. I left my off. I was in the faculty office, and somebody just walked in, and actually not only my laptop, few laptops, and they just snapped it. That little lock doesn't really matter. It's just a little piece of plastic. It's hard enough, but if you give it a good tug, it will snap. It's preferable that you take your laptop away from you. That's the reason it is mobile. Don't leave it in your office. But if you have to, it's definitely better than nothing. Mobile device security. Now what you can have is you can download a software that you can remotely wipe everything on your device. And um, Apple iOS has that, and Android has that as well. Not only tracking where your phone is using the GPS, but also wiping it or encrypting it completely if somebody got hand on it. That's probably a good idea to do that. And if you have sensitive information on your mobile phones, you can use, of course, your voice encryption to have access. Now we can use our thumbs on our phones. So it's probably a good idea to do that. And in addition to that, have a backup password. That's what I use with my mobile device. I use my not my voice name recognition or even face recognitions. I don't. That's probably a little bit more. I don't know. Well, my phone doesn't even do that. It does just I do the thumb and a backup password just in case my thumb was wet or dirty or whatever. All right, the 5 steps in securing your operating system. So please write those 5 steps down. Okay. Number one, you have to develop the security policy. That's very important. It has to be a written security policy of what you can and cannot do to the operating system, what you can and cannot access if you're using the web, if you're using the browser, what you can and cannot download, if you can install applications or not, change settings in the operating system. So there has to be a security policy of what the operating system is, what kind of operating system, and what are the security settings have to be for individuals depending on who you are. Create a host software baselining. Keep track of what's normal. There's a software that keeps track of everyday's activities on the operating system, and you'll create a baseline, something that you can reference to. So if you're going to have a detection system that detects an attack, it has to reference it to a baseline, a reference point. So, for example, if your normal working operation on your computer is from 9 to 5, and you create a baseline over a couple of weeks, a month or so, and if something all of a sudden happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know something is wrong. They will be able to catch that. So there has to be a software baselining installed that keeps track of what's the normal traffic, what's the normal activities on your device. Next, you configure the operating system's security and settings, setting up the username and password, all the different types of setting, what you can and cannot access, how much of a hard drive space you have, all of that has to be set up. And of course, you deploy the settings to all the devices. If there is any batch management, if there is batch managements that have to be installed, if Microsoft, for example, sends you a patch to install on your system, you should install it immediately. Windows 10, Windows 8 have that immediately, so you don't have to worry about that. Don't interfere with that. Any patches that are sent to you should automatically be installed on your system and all the network devices as well. All right, again, back to the security policy. It is a document or multiple documents that clearly define the organization's defense mechanism. and you should adhere to all the standards and what you can and cannot do. And in the security policy, you should also state, what the consequences are if you do not adhere to the standard. Maybe you'll be given a warning the first time, or and ultimately you'll be dismissed if you do not, if you did something that is really outrageous. All right. Again, with the host software baselining, you could do the standard checklist again, which system can be evaluated and which one is not. So you can always, do an audit on the systems to figure out which system is not is something wrong with them. Maybe they'll show a red flag, something that is, out of the ordinary and abnormal, you know an anomaly, something that is out of the ordinary, it will automatically send a flag. Here's one thing that is always helpful. If you let the users know that you are going to audit their systems, most likely no one will do anything. No one will install software or try to tweak any of the settings. Why bother? Because they know they're going to be audited and they're going to be in trouble if they do so. So just by saying you're going to be audited every 3 or 6 months, you got to bring in the system, we got to take a look at it, clean it up. They don't do that. They don't even install anything personal on their computer system. And I've been into organization where they just say that and they never audited anything. By just saying it, really you prevent 90% of the problems on the system, downloading viruses and things like that. Um, when it comes to baselining, you want to, you can actually create a template that will get rid of the default settings. So for example, if you have a guest user, get rid of it if you're not ever going to use it. All unnecessary software, services, or protocol installed on your system, if they are not using them, disable them or get rid of them. Enable security features such as a firewall. If you have an old operating system, that doesn't have like if you don't have the latest Microsoft operating system. Windows 7, 8, and 10 have already a pretty good firewall settings, and it's enabled by default. They have an antivirus program, the Defender, and they work pretty well. You should get familiar with them and how to use these, or change the configuration if you need to. By the defaults are pretty good protections so far, so you should not really tamper with any of these, especially the firewall, because they are designed to really protect you from denial of service attacks and viruses and things like that. Make sure you deploy the settings. All the settings should be deployed not only to your device, but all to the devices that are needed. So what it's typically done is you take, let's say you have 100 or 200 or even 500 users. You take one device, you buy one device, let's say it's a Dell machine, and you install all the applications, you create the settings for it, the security settings, everything. And you test it out, make sure it's 100%, make sure it has the firewall settings are done correctly, in addition to the operating systems, getting rid of all the defaults, whatever needs to be done. Once it's perfect, you take an image of the whole system, in all the operating system, everything, the application. An image is just a copy of everything, and you can install that on the server. And then what you do is you deploy this to all the machines. That's for local settings, for local machine. When somebody logs in and they go to the server and they put in the username and password, then they get authenticated, then they are going to be authorized some access. How do they go authorized? It all depends on the group policy. You're going to create a group policy, and depending on which department you are in, you're going to be able to gain access to certain applications and resources. Um, it's much easier. We'll learn some of this when we do this in the Active Directory in Microsoft Windows 2.16 server One of these classes will be able to do that. So group policies makes life a lot easier um, in deploying um, security settings. So if somebody, for example, went from the sales into the engineering, you just move their name, their object name from the sales department into the engineering department or the production department. And when that happens, they'll lose all this. They'll lose all the security settings that they had under the sales department and they'll gain it under the engineering or the production department. Much easier to do that way. All right, so when it comes to operating system, the operating systems are made up of many, many codes, millions of codes. So it's almost impossible to really figure out where the problems are if there is any bugs in them. But if somebody just finds a loophole in one of these codes, it's much easier to use these codes and manipulate them. Excuse me. So sometimes, operating system vendors like in Microsoft, they're working 24/7. There is a team that is constantly looking for loopholes, specifically security loopholes, and try to patch them. That's why they ask you if anything goes wrong with your system, if you have any memory exceptions errors, please send them immediately. They're going to look at them and find out if it's a security problem or a patch that needs to be done to make the operating system more stable. So it's probably a good idea anytime you have an error, send it to the vendor to let them take a look at it so that they can make the next update in their software much better, much more stable, and much more secured, of course. Okay. So look at these code of lines, the lines of codes in an operating system. The Mac iOS 10.4 had 86 million. The BNM version has 5.0 has 24 million. So you're talking about millions and millions of codes in an operating system. So it's huge we're talking about. Okay. What is a hotfix? A hotfix addresses a specific customer situation. So if you have a specific issue with your device or your application or your operating system, and because you're using it in a certain way, you can call your vendor and the vendor will create a fix just for you. They're not going to create it for everybody because it must be a little bit costly and everybody doesn't need that fix. So that's what a hot fix is. A hot fix, they do it for a specific customer situation. A surface pack is when you have a lot of patches over time, maybe a year or so, and hotfix what they do is they put all of these together and they put them in a surface pack and you can download them. Um, Microsoft Office has Surface Pack 1 and 2, I think. Surface Office 13 had it. You should definitely get those because you get not only fixes, but they also additional features you'll get with the Surface Packs. All right. You can have these patches to automatically update, and that is definitely um, the preferred method, and it is the default with Windows. So don't tamper with that. Sometimes you get a little window, we have an update, please click here. Definitely click it and let it update. The only annoyance thing is that you need to reboot your system every once in a while when that happens. But you should never, definitely when you get the chance, immediately install the updates. You usually download it, but they'll ask you to install them because sometimes it takes a little bit of time. And with Windows, at least, as we're all familiar with it, um, they'll install it when we turn off our computers. And next time we turn it on, it may take a little bit longer when it's installing all of these updates. But definitely do not interfere or not updating it, installing it, I mean, installing the patches. You want to get them installed as quickly as possible because it's going to make your system more stable and more secured, of course. All right, so that's the vendor server that sends you the update. Once you or have the automated patch on your server, it gets deployed to all the devices immediately. The antivirus software. The antivirus definitely knows one machine should be running without an antivirus software. If you're running Windows 10, you have the Defender, but McAfee does a pretty good job if you have it installed on your system because McAfee also has the features to identify websites, which websites are known to have viruses, which websites are safe if you are the type of person that is constantly on the internet downloading stuff, but you should definitely have an antivirus program that is constantly running. The antivirus program has what we call definition, known viruses. So every time you download a file, that file is compared to all the definitions that it has. If there is a match, it immediately flags it as a problem. And it will let you know, should we delete it, quarantine it, then it'll ask you what to do with it. I usually just get rid of it, no matter what it is. But the problem with antivirus, they got to keep updating these definitions constantly. But that's okay, right? Anti-spam. Anti-spam is spammers distribute malware through the email um, attachments. So be very careful. Like I said, I think on the last lecture or the one before, whenever you get an email from anyone and they ask you to download anything that you're not familiar, delete it and do not respond. Never open up an attachment if you are not if the person that is sending you the attachment, you're not familiar with them. You don't know who they are, so don't open it up. So be very, very careful. All right, so that's anti. Pop-ups, um, pop-up blockers. I think that's pretty taken care of with the browsers, with the Chrome, with the Firefox, and even with Microsoft Explorer. Um, and some websites need to open up the browser, need to have a pop-up displayed, but what they'll do, they'll give us an options to open it up or not. And something will come up and will say, do you want, this web page wants to open up a pop, do you want, I mean, to want to open up a window, do you allow it or not? So again, it all depends on which website you went to, and it's really up to you to allow it or not. You can allow it always, or you can allow it just for that one instant. Firewall. Well, I want you to write down what a firewall is. The firewall is designed to prevent malicious packets from entering or leaving computers. Think of a firewall like a security guard in front of the building. He has a list of who's allowed or who is denied entrance. And it could be either going in or out, right? So if you come in, a packet comes in, he's going to look up to see if you're allowed to go in or not. If you're not allowed, they'll block you. So firewalls do not prevent viruses. If somebody pretended to be you, they can go in. Um, if the data is encrypted, they won't be able to read it. But we can get around that. So when you set up a VPN, when the data comes through the VPN, it has to be decrypted before it's given to the firewall before you're allowed to get entrance into the network, for example, right? Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows 10 do have firewalls, and if you connect to a wireless network, you'll be asked, do you want to go, is it a public, home, or work? If it's a public network, the different settings are going to be set up so no one will be able to see you, will prevent anybody from seeing you for rogue access points and so on. If you are at home, it will have less settings, so you'll have access to different devices. And if you are work, different types of firewall settings will be set up. So when you connect to a wireless network, it all depends on where you are. So you click and choose the one that is appropriate, and then Windows will take care of the settings for you. Monitoring system logs. Firewall has them, security logs, application logs, operating system logs. What a log is, any event that happens, it's recorded. So with the firewall logs, for example, if a packet is denied entrance, they record it. If it permitted entrance, it recorded when, which IP address, what they were trying to access as well. So if anything goes wrong, we can check these logs and figure out what the problem is. With the computer, in the event viewer, for example, in your operating system, it keeps track. There's a log of all the events that happened on your computer. If you installed an application, if you updated something, if you installed a new hardware, all of that happens. And you can tell if, for example, if somebody brought me a system that is acting sluggish, one of the first thing I can take a look at is the event viewer. If I see that they installed something last night and this is when the problem happened, maybe if you uninstall that application, you'll solve the problem, right? Audit logs, for example, can keep track of the user authentication attempts that can happen on the Radius service, on the Radius server or the TACX service. You know those authentications servers for all users that are trying to remotely access the network. Right? All of these log systems are very, very important. And by the way, some of these log systems, they can be used by IDS systems, the intrusion detection system. If they say something is happening, they immediately, that is out of an anomaly, for example, something out of the ordinary, it immediately sends a flag to the fire. The IDS system will send a flag to the firewall that's sitting on the edge of the network to block all the data from coming in because the data that's coming in looks suspicious. So you can connect them to these log systems to a firewall and we will do something like that when we're in one of our Cisco classes when we are setting up VPNs and IDS and IPS systems. The event logs, for example, like I said, they can give you the client requests and server responses, user information, account information, operational information, and so on. Security application logs, they can give you the antivirus software logs are good. Automated batched update service logs when that happened. Here's a typical Microsoft event viewer and audit log system. What are the benefit of monitoring the system logs? I want you to write these 5 points down. Identify security incidents, policies, violations, fraudulent activities. Provide information shortly after an event occurs. Provide information to help resolve problems. Help identify operational trends and long-term problems. And also, finally, provide documentation of regulatory compliance. All right, remember, take these points down. Application security. Now, the application security, this is mostly done at the vendor when they are designing and creating their application security. But the development security is going to be an important task when we're talking about securing the applications, hardening the application itself, you know, deploying patches and installing them, and patch management. Make sure when there is a patch, you deploy it to all the devices that are needed. All right, so and again with the error exceptions, the faults that occurs while the application is running, a response should be based on the error itself. What happens? You know, that information is sent immediately to the vendor to let them know if they could do something to create a hot fix, for example, maybe or maybe a fix in a batch that can be deployed to everyone. What else do you need to know? Okay, cover some of that. Fuzz testing is a software technique that deliberately provide invalid, unexpected, or random input data. What you should do with fuzz testing is the fuzzing is to do that in a virtual environment. It's probably best to do that. In other words, you create a virtual box, put the applications in the virtual box. So if something goes wrong, you want to find out exactly what kind of errors you're having and how the system crashes, and this doesn't affect the whole system. And this way you can deploy a defense, right? Um, so it, you're intended to prevent exploiting vulnerability. So the different three types of attacks I want you to write: the executable file attacks, system tampering, and process spawning control. And those three attacks, you can write the description if you want, but I want the defenses as well. How do you prevent executable file attacks? One way of doing it is by making sure those executable files, you put what's called an attribute on them that is called executable only. That means if there's an attribute on it, it doesn't matter who you are, even if you are the supervisory to even if you are the one who created that file, you won't be able to delete it, remove it, rename it, modify it, nothing. The only way you can do it is if you are a supervisor. Actually, I did say delete it. If you are only the supervisors, you can delete it. And then you have to put another one in, but you can never copy it, modify it, or anything like that. All right, so copy those 3 points down. The patch management, like I said earlier, make sure that are you that the if there's any patches that are downloaded, they are installed immediately. Okay, immediately. Securing the data. Make sure the data is secured in transit. It has to be encrypted or using a VPN. If it is stored on a local machine, those files could be encrypted using the Microsoft EFS system. You encrypt file by file, or using the BitLocker, you can encrypt the whole hard drive, right? So we need to use the DLP, the Data Loss Prevention System. Please write that down. The system of security tools that are used to recognize and identify critical data and ensure that it's protected. The goal is to protect data from unauthorized users. That's the DLP. Okay, so, and we're also with the DLP, we need to examine the data in use. For example, if you are printing something, the data in motion, that's where you use a VPN, and the data at rest. This is where you can use the BitLocker, for example, um, to encrypt your hard drive. And attackers nowadays they can use this. They can send a software or a virus on your computer that will encrypt your whole hard drive. And there's only one key to decrypt it. I think we talked about that before. So if you ever see your system, I know I mentioned it I think before, if you're sitting there and all of a sudden you see your computer is acting funny while you're not doing anything, immediately unplug it. If it starts going crazy, because if it's a virus that's trying to encrypt your hard drive, you interrupted it, then you should be okay. Because if you let it go all the way out and the encryption is done, then you're out of luck. Don't ever pay if they ask you to pay anything in Bitcoins or anything like that. You're going to have to take the hit and reinstall everything all over again. All right, and that's it for the chapter. So please take the notes that I asked you to. And until we meet again, good luck.